Okay, so getting Twinmotion into Unreal, the first place we're going to start is we're going to open up Epic Games Launcher. We're going to go to our library, and this should be a little bit of a review, but we're going to scroll down and we're going to make sure that we have a couple of plugins already installed, and those are going to be the Twinmotion content for Unreal and the Datasmith Twinmotion importer for Unreal. And both of these are going to be really important for this. The next thing we can do is we'll come up here and I'm going to launch Unreal 5.0.3. They did just come out with a 5.1, so the time of recording this, I guess I'm already out of date, unfortunately. But I didn't want to open up something I think everyone installed Unreal like last week, so I don't want to go into a whole new build just in case there's something that's changed from what you're going to see. So I'm opening up Unreal Editor. It's going to give me this splash screen so I can create a new kind of template here, and I'm going to come into the Architecture tab. I'm going to open up just a blank project. They have a couple of kind of blueprints here that are kind of nice. If you're trying to achieve a certain thing, like the handheld AR, or, you want to model something that you want your model to show up on a desk while people look through their phone or something like that, you can go about it that way. And again, I'm not trying to get too far into any of these specific different models, because this is like a class all of its own. So I'm going to open up a blank project. I'm just going to leave my default project locations, and I'm going to call this test. There we go. Oh, and I cannot have spaces because it needs to be a computer readable format, so just gonna have to modify my name a little bit here. And then still have an issue, so I'm just gonna call it that. It should be fine. Hit create. It's now going to load up Unreal Engine. This is going to take a little bit of time to initialize everything in the project. And here we go. So now automatically it opens up some project settings. So I can put in like a description of the project name, a project version if I'm going to be working on that. Again, this is mainly set up to do video game editing. So if you do change your version, it's meant to be able to like publish when someone figures out how to cheat on your game, I guess, without having to uninstall and reinstall the entire game and lose all their saves. The main thing that we want to check on this screen, so we come over on the right side, we have all of our project settings, and we're just going to scroll down, and the main one that we want to work on is rendering. And we want to come down, and I think all of these are pretty good, but there's a couple that we want to check. One is the color space, and I'm just going to leave sRGB the default for now. Each one of these it's important to understand what these are if you are going to change them, but I don't think we have to. The main thing I'm looking at is global illumination, and I want to make sure that that is set to lumen. I want to make sure that my reflections are also set to lumen. I want to also come down into the lumen tab here and make sure that use hardware ray tracing when available is enabled, because anyone who has a graphics card that's capable of using hardware ray tracing, so pretty much like any of the NVIDIA RTX cards, is going to work for this, but it's going to leverage the hardware if it's available. If you don't have an RTX card, it's not the end of the world. It's going to be okay. But I do want to make sure that's checked, just so that it's checking those. And then also with the ray lighting mode, I have a surface cache, or I can have a hit lighting for reflections. And if you hover over this, it'll give you a little bit more of a description. But the hit lighting is essentially every place that a ray is bounces or hits an object is where that's going to come. Where the lighting and the shadows are going to come from. And so I'm going to make sure that that's set to hit for me. It's really, again, not going to make or break your scene either way. The software ray tracing mode, I want to be set to detail. Again, this is set for the highest quality. It could be a little bit of a problem where you have a really complex scene. You might see a little bit of a performance hit, but for our example, we just have the Farnsworth house, which is a pretty simple project. And the other one is, I think that's it. I think that's all we have to do. We can check our hardware ray tracing is that we're using all of the hardware ray tracing settings where we can. And that, I'm just going to scroll through here really quick. I believe that's all we have to worry about for our rendering. Great. And I need to hide some of these objects so I don't see anything. Excuse me. And I can close this. So now I'm set up with kind of my default scene here. In the case that it did not show up for you, you can come over here to Edit, and you can go into Project Settings, and it'll pop open that same panel that we were just looking at. So the next thing I'm going to do, I have a bunch of default objects that are already brought into this blank scene. I'm just going to leave those for now. They're not really hurting anything. I'll be going over a little bit of those in a second here. But the first thing we have to do before we bring anything into Unreal is we have to come in here to our settings, and we're going to go to Plugins. And then in the search bar, I'm just going to type Twinmotion. And we can see here I have the 2 Twinmotion plugins that I've downloaded. And I'm just going to enable those. And I get a little bit, I get a full pop-up here. That's just letting me know that this is still in beta. So they're saying, hey, be aware we're still in beta. There could be some issues. So after I have both of those selected, I'm going to have to restart Unreal Engine to have them kind of kick over. Doesn't take too long, hopefully. If not, it's a good excuse to go get a cup of coffee. And we're gonna let that kick over here, and we can see here we've got like a couple of different window panes. It might have been a little bit easier if I minimized these so they weren't completely full screen, but now we have our blank scene here. First thing to note is similar to using Rhino Inside is that there is a coordinate system within Unreal. And so our 0, 0, 0 is going to align with our Twinmotion scene. So kind of depending on the height of your topography and how you've modeled your Twinmotion scene, this might work a little bit differently for you, but it should be pretty good to go. So the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Window, and this is just a personal preference, and I'm going to say Load Layout, and I'm going to use the UE4 Classic layout. This is my personal preference because I've I'm more used to UE4. I'm still kind of transitioning, I guess. So I like to use this UE4 classic layout if you're kind of following along. Hopefully that will help kind of make more sense of why my screen space might look a little bit different. So then to bring in our Twinmotion scene, I'm going to go and there's this kind of quickly add to the project dropdown. And if I come down here to Datasmith, I can go to File Import. And then I will browse to my project. And for this one, it's the Farnsworth case study in my Twinmotion folder. So I'm just going to select the Twinmotion file that we were working on during the Twinmotion portion of the class. In some cases, it might be a good idea to do a save as from in Twinmotion and just call it UE export. But I'm not doing that for this class, so I'm going to open up that, and then I'm also going to come in here and make a whole new file. I'm going to say add new folder, and I did that by right-clicking into this canvas. I'm going to call this Twinmotion, just so that I have kind of a separate container for all of the stuff I'm about to import. And I'm going to say OK. One thing I will note on this is if you don't have a couple of these folders, like the engine folder or the developers folder, that's okay, and I'll show you how to get those in case that you want some of that information in there. But for now, we want to make kind of our own folder for what we're about to import. I'm going to import everything within my Twinmotion file. I don't want to edit anything out. I can expand the advanced tab and expand my static mesh options, and I don't really feel like I need to change any of this at all. I think it's going to work pretty good. So then I'll click import, and this will take just a little bit of time, but we are using not an entirely complicated set. So now it's giving me a couple of messages, and this is a little bit of an important note. Just to be aware of what is and isn't working. So these are the materials that aren't working. And I'm guaranteeing that this is probably has to do with the person that I put in there. One of the biggest issues that I've noticed in bringing a file from Twinmotion into Unreal is that a lot of the dynamic characters or actors in the Twinmotion scene don't import very well or won't import at all. So things like the character that's kind of doing the cha-cha, or some of like the moving animals and things like that just will not import altogether. And I think that's also part of like why they're saying, hey, this is in beta, so it's not going to be a one-to-one import. Anyway, just something to be cognizant of. I don't need to clear these. They're just going to kind of persist in my file for now. But if I close that, I can now see that I have my Twinmotion scene in Unreal Engine, which is a lot of fun. It doesn't look very good right now, and that's okay. That's because we still have a lot of kind of tweaking and settings that we can do to this to make it a little bit better. The other thing to note is that over up in the left-hand side of the view window, while we have this option to change how we're showing or displaying this viewport, because right now we're kind of in developer mode, so we can see like a grid on the ground for where the floor is. We can see the box for where our post-processing volume is. We can see a whole bunch of stuff there, and it's also displaying some of our shadows as well. So if I am experiencing some serious hardware setbacks and it's really hard to move around my scene, what I'll often do is go to unlit, and now I'm running quite a bit faster. Another way to kind of double check this, I have this little hamburger over here. Click on that, and you can say show feet per second, or your sorry, not feet per second, your frames per second, and this will show you kind of how fast your scene is running. And you're looking, the highest performance is something about 60, and you really don't want to drop below like 15 if you're trying to do anything where the character or the viewer might move through your project. So if you're doing something in like VR, definitely want to keep those frames per second very high. Otherwise, you're gonna kind of get that jittery, stuttering kind of feel, and for a lot of people that'll give them some kind of like motion sickness, or they're not going to be too happy about that. So if I come back up here, I can click on my unlit scene, and if I go to lit, I can see I've already dropped down to about 32 frames per second. I don't have the best graphics card in the world, so it's also not the worst. So I'm not complaining about that, especially with all of my grass moving and my trees and so on and so forth. Another thing that's really nice about when we imported this into Unreal is I also have this perspective kind of button in the upper left-hand corner of the viewport. And this will let me change the way that I'm looking at the view, or change the kind of camera projection. But I also have all of the cameras that I created in Twinmotion. So all of those scenes that I was exporting out from Twinmotion are now their own viewport or kind of cameras, which is nice. And if I look over, I can actually see the other cameras in the camera. In Unreal, your cameras have what they're calling actors, so something you can select. And when you select on that, it's actually a really nice function to be able to see that camera as its own object. Because if we notice in the right-hand side of the window, we get a ton of properties that we can then change. And for example, we can actually set our lens settings to have, essentially, we can build a physical camera with all of the physical camera settings within Unreal. So if you know that you really like to shoot all of your images in like a 35mm with certain ISO and f-stop and all of these different features and shutter speed, and you're really familiar with that, all of these things are exposed to you so that you can kind of come through and play with all of this stuff if you would like. I'm not going to go through that. Again, that's, you could get a master's in photography and all of this would make a lot more sense. But if you did want to kind of change some of this stuff, play around with it, have fun. Again, where I'm using a 16:9 DSLR is what it is. I could go to like a super 35mm. And if I go, I think I'm on image 3 here. So if I come into image 3 and I start to change this stuff around, so back to 16:9, we can see how that's changing the way that our aperture is, or our camera is handling its settings to be as realistic as possible. I don't like to be able to see all of this stuff. There's a really quick way to turn that off. And if you hit the G key on the keyboard, you have to kind of click into the viewport and then hit G. It'll toggle all of your actors that you have over here kind of on and off. Because in some cases it's really nice to be able to click on these objects and get that information really quick. And in some cases, it's nice just to be able to see the scene. Another really helpful kind of keyboard shortcut is F11. And if you click on that, it'll go into, I think, what they call immersive mode. So it lets you kind of switch in between the ways that you're viewing your scene. So that's another kind of helpful quick keyboard shortcuts to be able to kind of show and hide all of your stuff. So if I come back up into my outliner here, which shows all of the objects in my project, there's one object that I really don't like, and that was that default floor from the beginning. So I can either click on that, or I could find it in my outliner here, and I'm just going to delete it. I'm going to delete it out of the project. The next thing, again, if we're looking at lighting and we're looking back at our inspiration photo from the kind of previous classes, we had this kind of really nice volumetric light kind of coming through here. So I want to be able to kind of replicate that a little bit better. And in order to do that, I'm going to show off a couple of different kind of tools and actors here. So one thing we'll notice is that the sky in Unreal Engine looks, I think, much nicer. We still have kind of our cardboard cutout backdrop. Oh, it's auto-saving on me. That's another setting we could either enable or disable. And actually at this point, I would actually go to save all or save current level as something, and I'm going to call this one Twinmotion EX, for example. Which brings up another point that I think is, and here we go. We've got another error log here of a lot of the materials didn't want to come in. And again, back to the whole point that this is in beta mode. So as we kind of go through, some of these maps aren't working the way they should. So I'm going to clear that and close this. But now at least I have my level saved, so if I do crash or anything comes up, ooh, hey, the actual house is completely gone. That's no good at all. So I may have to re-import this. We'll see. Another thing that might happen too is that in Unreal, like, don't panic. Sometimes it will show or hide objects based on whether they're compiled or not. So some objects may not be loading in. It says that I still have an object in here. Okay. Well, we may or may not get our building back while we're waiting on this, because again, as I hit save, it's kind of compiling a lot of stuff in the background. That would be a little bit detrimental right now for the sake of this video. So what I might just do, I'm going to come in here, I'm going to collapse this, and I'm going to delete all of the Farnsworth stuff. I'm going to delete my cameras. I'm going to delete Chris. And have a couple of these. Oh my goodness. Oh, it's kind of jumbled all of my objects over here. So this is unfortunate, but ideally these things would not have their own these things would all be collapsed into the same same kind of object. So I just want to make sure I'm not deleting anything out of that kind of base scene, which I probably am. Yes, I am. So I'm actually going to go up here to File, and I can say Open Level. I'm going to come back in here to my main level and just re-import this. Don't save. Back up to quickly add a project, Datasmith, file import, Farnsworth example, hit open, put it in the Twinmotion folder. We'll say OK, import all. Small hiccup, but the next thing that I want to do show off after this gets done loading is how to adjust this kind of sun and sky within Unreal to get something a little bit more accurate. And I think we're doing okay on time. Okay, there it is. That's nice. So within our kind of basic set of actors in this scene, and I might actually try to hide this. There we go. So here I am back to kind of the original objects. I do have a couple of things in here that are a little bit fun to play with. So it brings in a default camera. I don't need that anymore. That's really not helping me at all because I have all of my cameras from Twinmotion. I have an exponential height fog, which is a fun thing to play with. We'll get into that a little bit later. And then I have these volumetric clouds, which are also kind of fun to play with. And for these, we can actually change, again, if you click on the object, on the right-hand side, you have a bunch of properties of how to manipulate that object. And if I change that layer bottom, we can actually make these like more foggy kind of bank clouds, or like some kind of higher clouds. We can also see that this cloud actor has motion built into it, so the clouds actually do move a little bit. They kind of drift above your head. I think next class I'm going to go over how to really tweak these using an add-in or a plugin that's really nice, but it shouldn't affect us too much right now. So we do have this kind of fog actor, or these volumetric clouds that we have overhead that are making our clouds for us. And then we have this sun and sky and a skylight. And these two things kind of work in tandem with one another. But if we click on the sun and sky, if we look at our properties down here, we can see that we have latitude and longitude, our time zone, a north offset. So this is a little bit similar to like what was in Twinmotion, only our latitude and longitude was set using that map and our along with our time zone, and then we had a manual kind of north offset that we could play with. But if I look around, I can see my sun up here. So if I change my north offset, I can see I'm getting quite a bit different lighting. And the cool thing about these volumetric clouds is that we can also see the lighting on the clouds change. So like the under surfaces and the cloud shadows actually work with our sunlight. And then we can also change our month, so what month it is. We can also change what day it is within that month, which is kind of nice. And then we can also change our time. So if we come in here to like a twilight scene where now the sun is technically behind the horizon, so this would be like early sunrise, we'd see also our sky is in a pretty realistic way, working well with that light. we could actually fly up into those clouds and see that they are a volumetric object, which is, I think, really nice. So we can come here to maybe a little bit later. We'll do like 6. You can see I'm just very, pretty much I have an hour that I'm working with here. You know, they call it the golden hour, I guess. We can see just a little bit of the sun over on that edge there. But we get a really nice kind of sky, dome, and atmosphere as a result of hopefully a realistic location of the sun, depending on how well you set this up. It's kind of up to you to make sure that these are all correct. And kind of a fun way to play around with this, which to me is where now Unreal's starting to show its colors of like why it's better, because you can tweak all of this. So the next thing that I'd like to talk about is this post-process volume, and this is a pretty important piece to achieving the right kind of feel for your rendering. And there's kind of 2 ways to go about a couple of these settings. One of them is to select the camera, and you'll see a whole bunch of properties in your camera. And so you can adjust each camera individually. But let's say you have a scene and you have 5 or 6 cameras set up, and you want them all to have kind of a neutral or common ground from where you're working from. That's where this post-process volume is really nice. And it's not very big right now. I usually like to stretch this out to encompass all of my project, and I can do that by kind of coming up into this right hand side here. We went over, I think, last class about how we manipulate a lot of our geometry. On this right side, I can click on select and scale objects, and if I hover over this, so all 3 axes are selected, I can kind of I'll left click on that, and then I just drag my mouse kind of up or down to scale this. So I'm going to drag this way out so that I can see everything that I want to see. And then with it selected, now I can come into the properties for the skylight. And as I spoke before, I really like to set up kind of a set of guidelines for myself so that I understand what's happening. So I'm going to make a couple of really basic shapes here, just to help myself out and cue myself in as to what's actually happening. I think I spoke about this too, is having, might be getting a little bit of a freeze. There we go, great. So the first one that I like to have is just a white sphere. And this helps me understand light pretty well. I'm also going to drag out a gray and a black sphere, and then probably a chrome sphere as well. And these 4 things, I'm actually stealing this from another kind of master, or the maestro that I learned from of how to do lighting in Unreal, is that he always sets 4 spheres up in most of his scenes so that he can better understand the lighting. Because now we're using dynamic lighting. We're not using like a render setting specifically. We're using a whole bunch of settings that all have to work together. So what he has is a kind of a 4-sphere method. And if I hold the Alt key while I drag one of these out, I make a copy of it. So here's my kind of 4 spheres. 4 spheres, and I'm just going to give them a little bit more space, maybe. All right. So now if I click on this object, I can see I have a couple of settings over in my settings panel as well. And here we have a materials place or slot, and I can use a drop down and kind of change change these from ones that I already have in here. So if I say black unlit, that's not a good material to use. Oh, come on now. Ooh, okay. Thank you, autosave. So then I want kind of a gray sphere. And that is actually a little bit too reflective. So if I click on it and I double click on this image, it'll bring me into a scene where I can adjust a lot of the settings of this material, which is really nice. So I have a parent material, which is what I want. But then I want to come into my color. Here we go. And my roughness is what I want to change. I want to make this fairly rough so that I don't get a bunch of my, I don't want it to feel like a chrome ball. I want it to feel more of like a diffuse or matte paint. So I'm going to say there, and then my color I think is right about, it's almost 50. I'm going to bring this up just a little bit. Or no, that's right. Sorry. Color works on like a linear scale, so I think that is right about mid-gray. And then from there, I can say save sibling, and I'm going to call this basic shape material instance 1. That's fine for me, and I'm going to save that under my content. I'm going to make a new folder under there and call it material, maybe temp, just for now. You could come up with probably a better version than that. And then I can close out of my materials. After this is done loading. And now we can see that material has been affected. So now I have a kind of a nice mid-gray ball. And then the last one I want to do is make kind of a black ball. So I can go into my instance here, double click on it, and now I'm back into what we were seeing before, because now I have this parent here versus, which is where we were getting into the graph editor. So this is the difference between like a parent and a child, I guess, is one way to think about it. And we can see we have little asterisks here showing that they're instances of this kind of base material shape, if that makes any sense at all. Hopefully it does. So I'll double click on this. I'm going to make this one black. I'm going to come in here. I can click on my color, bring my color really close to almost all the way black, say OK, and then come into save to a sibling instance, and I'm going to call this instance 2, I guess, back into my materials temp. So I'll call this instance 2, and hit save. Then I can close, and it's a little bit shiny. A little too shiny for me, and it looks like somehow I've changed this one. So take that one back to instance 1. So now I've got my gray, my white, and my black, and then I can adjust my chrome up here. This is a kind of a long about way of editing some of the materials, and then we're always thinking about lighting here. So from like this side here, I have a really nice kind of gradient. This looks really good. But if I stand over here, I can tell my exposure is a little hot. Like this gray is starting to get a little bit closer to white. And I might just delete out the chrome one for now, but for now the 3 balls, the chrome one is helpful, and I'll be a little bit more concise about how to do that. I don't want to get into the graph editor, which is the only reason I'm not touching that. So we can see here we have these kind of 3 nice materials. I'm actually going to turn on Um, or kind of create a camera. I guess I have a camera over here from the Farnsworth stuff. So if I click on image 1, is the one I'll probably use, and I'll come over here and go to image 1. So if I click on this camera actor, which is currently off, I could also kind of zoom around. Oops. If I click on that camera actor, I can adjust quite a bit of my image settings from that camera. But again, that's more of like an instance view of the camera. Or sorry, it's an instance-based setting. So it's only going to affect that camera. It's not going to affect my entire scene. Versus if I click on the post-process volume, and I come down here into my settings, and I'm actually going to just come back into perspective, and I'm going to come back over here, and I'm going to start playing with some of these settings. I'm going to come into G so I don't see all my actors. I can just select post-process. So I can actually adjust my exposure from this. So we can see if I overexpose it, and it's a little bit of a dynamic thing. So if I overexpose it, we can see how my gray starts to fall out. So that's where I like to do the 4 balls method, is that I can very quickly tell like how far everything is. I can also kind of underexpose things, and now my gray is leaning too far to black. And it also depends on kind of where you're looking at. If I have the sunset to my back, this looks really nice. So it is a useful way to kind of adjust these kind of global settings. The other things that I can do, if I come back over and I'm like looking into the sun, you can see I've got a little bit of a kind of lens flare right there. And if I come right here, I can see I have a little bit of that lens flare, and I do want that for this. So I come back into my post-processing volume. I'm done applying my exposure settings. There's a bunch of different settings that you could kind of go through and change this. I could up a little bit of a bloom, so I can change the intensity of my bloom. So we can see how that's actually affecting how that sun is looking. And that bloom is also affecting the way that the shadows are looking around this ball. And I'm just arbitrarily picking these to kind of show you how things can work. So again, lens flares, I can turn that intensity up. That looks like hot garbage, so I don't want to do that. I'm going to leave it at 0.1 for now. But there's a whole bunch of stuff you can do to kind of adjust that. I can change my dirt mask. I can add a little bit of chromatic aberration, and this is a camera effect. We can see it very highlighted on our spheres here. This is more extreme than you're going to get unless you're a really terrible photographer. So I would definitely tune this way back to just the tiniest touch. And this will just bring out, again, we're trying to replicate of what a physical camera would do. So that's going to help it feel a little bit more real there. We can also add a dirt mask if we wanted to, which is like kind of crud on your lens if you don't clean your lens very much. And that can also help add a little bit of reality if you wanted to. We can adjust the temperature. So the cool thing about this is that if you wanted it to be like a really cold winter day, or like a really warm like desert scene, we can get a lot of kind of quick changes there. I usually like to leave it just at a white balance initially. I think it does a pretty good job of kind of balancing those things. And then from that white balance, kind of shift it one way or another, because then it doesn't get too, well, I guess the blue shift can get really extreme, but it keeps me more in kind of a safe zone where I'm not going to blow the whole thing out. But you can also just turn this off if you don't want to work with it. You can also change all of your shadows and adjust those, your midtones, your highlights, all of that. And again, that's why these three balls are really important to have, because you constantly have a visual reference of what your changes are doing and how they're affecting your scene from like low tech kind of feedback. If you're looking at a very complicated building, you're going to be noticing so much more detail that it's going to be hard to adjust it the way that you actually want, in a way that's going to be realistic and looks good. So I'll load in my whole Farnsworth house, and then I'll just keep these three balls around so that I know that what I'm doing is going to be closer to achieving my desired result.